Welcome to Grieving Voices. Today I am introducing Lindsay Joy Taylor on the podcast, and she is the grief advocate and owner of the Joyful Jewelry Box. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Victoria. I appreciate it.
I've been following Lindsay for a while on Instagram and in the grief community, and I've just really enjoyed kind of getting to know you from afar through your Instagram. And I think it's just the grief community, would you agree, is it's a different environment. It's so supportive
Very.
and yeah, you agree?
I definitely agree. And what's been really incredible is that, and you'll probably hear throughout my interview, but I didn't necessarily start my work in the grief space, but now I'm going on 6.5 years. And in the beginning, it was sparse. Certainly I think social media and online sharing has grown a lot in the last few years, but it was really sparse in the beginning. And now it's been, it's been incredible to see all of the grief accounts and advocacy and experts that have come out of this. It's just, I don't know that I expected that or that I anticipated that. And you hit it on the head in the sense that it's automatically a different community. It's automatically sort of this deep sensitivity and connection. And, I'm not somebody who loves small talk so much. And it's really kind of neat to just jump right in and we can just go to those places that really, speak to our lives. So I definitely agree. It's different than the online world in general, but it's also different than even what it was for me in the beginning, so that's been really neat to see.
I agree. And a lot of the deep conversations that I've had throughout my life have been with people who have gone through deeply troublesome, challenging times. And I think COVID too actually has helped to highlight grief overall and really bring the conversation to the forefront. And so thank you for your advocacy and for
Absolutely.
what
Thank
you
you.
do. Yeah, and actually let's start there. How did the Joyful Jewelry Box come about?
It's really kind of a special story to me because it sort of unfolded very organically. And yet when I tell the story and look back on it, it just sort of feels like this was the way the whole time. So, my relationship to grief is very intimate and lifelong. My mother was murdered when I was an infant. And so I've grown up really having a deep understanding of grief and then also feeling very outside of it, really not understanding all the ways that it's impacted my life because it's quite literally infused with my life. And so I think that contributed a lot to me and my temperament and who I am and what I believe in general. So I had always wanted to be in the helping services in some way, shape, or form. It's kind of funny. When I was a teenager, I used to joke that I wanted to be the next Dr. Laura. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she was a big time radio host at the time and really popular and then really controversial. And liked that idea of having these hard, honest conversations. Not so much that she told everybody how to live their life or what to do with their problems, but I really appreciated that dialogue for people to be honest, right? And so, in some way, shape, or form, I always knew that I wanted to work with people to help them in some way, shape, or form, but I don't know that I knew what that would look like. And so I went to school for communications and psychology. And the short version is I ended up working in mental health right after school, and I loved it. I did a lot of internal services that helped provide support to the direct services department. And it was built upon my strengths, but also really could see how it was giving back to the mental health community and really not only helping me, but helping others. And unfortunately, the funding for that position went away, and so I was laid off. It was very much sort of what we're seeing happening now. There's just not enough services out there, and or funding for the services, and you have very dedicated people who want to be able to provide this work and help these people, and it's just not always available to do so. So I've sort of forced into a season of how do I get creative, how do I be flexible and support my family my husband and I had just bought our first home, and we had just moved, and the daughter had surgery. And so it was kind of this, how do I pivot for this season? And I had always had a hobby of making jewelry, and I'd reconnected with another local jewelry designer. And the short version is I opened an Etsy shop. But in the beginning, it wasn't necessarily grief related. It certainly wasn't memorial or remembrance designs. It was more of, like I said, just how do I navigate this time right now? And once I kind of got my footing back underneath me, I realized I wanted to give back again. I really, that meaningful piece of just working with others, and really that humanitarian side of life, you know, is what gives me a lot of joy and fulfillment. And so I thought, how do I bridge all of these pieces together? And it kind of went back to my shop name in the beginning, in the sense that the Joyful Jewelry Box is based upon my middle name. Before my mom died, obviously, it was important to her that being my middle name to sort of represent the hard season that my family was going through at the time, and then also the deep joy that they felt when I was born. And so just not knowing her and not having a relationship with her, it's always been important to me to pay homage to her in ways that I could. And so that was where the name came from. And I kind of went back to that root in terms of, how do I take this meaningful piece of her life and everything I just told you and make it work? And I realized that jewelry was a significant piece of my grieving process for my mom. But growing up without her, I used to play with her jewelry box all the time. I would sift through it like it was a treasure box and just take all my favorite pieces and hide them here and there. And I realized it was a big comfort to me throughout my whole grief journey, but I didn't even necessarily realize it, right? And so it was so neat to sort of be here and be like, it just felt very full circle in the way of, how do I take all of these pieces and then now help other people infuse joy back into their life? How do I help them honor the loved ones that they miss so much? How do I help them keep their life and their memories alive? And so it was one of those things that sort of unfolded over, you know, the last 5 years or so. And I don't really know how else it would have ended up. You know, it's so funny because I didn't recognize how it was happening at the time. And I think, you know, I think grief can be like that in a lot of ways too. In the beginning, it's just sort of this horrific, all-consuming pain. You really can't imagine anything outside of it. You can't imagine any joy. You can't imagine bringing meaning to the deepest pain you've ever felt. And so it sort of feels like a literal metaphor in terms of what the grief journey can be for a lot of us.
I absolutely agree. And you go through the different phases of life and your grief changes, and with those phases too, I think too, right? Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
You know,
Well,
you start having kids and yeah.
Well, and I think too, kind of going back to what I said before, you know, like my middle name, for example, it feels like a big part of my grieving process now. And it was something that I actually really resented for a long time. I didn't feel like I was a joyful person. I didn't feel like I wanted to look on the bright side of things. I didn't feel like this was my mission to carry out, so to speak, you know. I don't even know that it was when this season of life started to reveal itself to me so much. And yet here I am now, still with all the pain and all the loneliness and growth and just all the things that happen over the years. But there's this really fulfilling component of having that connection with this community, of having this touchstone of, I built a really beautiful place that didn't exist when I needed it. And that just, yeah, I don't know. It's sort of hard to put into words. It's an alchemical process there, so to speak, you know?
It's a purpose. Yeah, it's a purpose for the pain. And I can relate to that. I think we often, and when we are deep in it, you can't see the other side. You can't see what's possible. Yeah. You can't see possibility. You don't look for the open doors. You don't really see your own potential either. I think that kind of gets hidden, masked.
Or do we even want it? You know,
right.
I mean, I don't want to speak for all grievers. Certainly we all have our own process, but in the work that I've done and with a lot of the grievers that I've worked with, that desire goes away for a while.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a while for kind of all those pieces that I talked about. I mean, and that's kind of the biggest piece of my story, really, is that, I'm a 37-year-old woman, and my mom's been dead for 36 years, and I still think of her every day. I still struggle every single day and wonder what life would be like with her, what life would be like to have a relationship with her. And so that's the biggest piece sort of to me in terms of this idea that it's just always going to be there in some way, shape, or form, and it will change shape, right? It will have different seasons. But this idea that you just get over it, or when does it get better, that hasn't been my experience. And so that's been the biggest testament for me, is really trying to use my perspective of time, but also, the unique lack of relationship there, to sort of articulate that that doesn't necessarily matter.
Now, it was your mom. Did you have then someone that kind of stepped in and took that role for you, and was that support for you as a child?
Definitely my sister. So shortly after my father did remarry, and that wasn't necessarily a positive relationship, although I had to be pretty reliant on her. She was around from like 2 to 4, 3 to 5. And so logistically speaking, right, I had to rely on her in some ways, but I don't have a lot of memories of her, and the ones that I do are really actually pretty traumatic. And so after she left the picture, my sister, so I'm the youngest of 3. My brother was 9, my sister was 7, and I was 1. So at that point, a few years had passed. My sister was about 9, and she really stepped in and became that integral maternal role for me. Certainly my father kept us all together and was the head of the family, but he owned his own business and was traumatized, quite honestly, and wasn't the primary caretaker. So there was a long time of just a lot of renegotiating those types of roles. And I don't really know where I would be without my sister. It's pretty interesting. We're very close and we're very independent. And so I don't want to say that she became my mother, but she became a model for me in a lot of those ways. But she also taught me how to take care of myself too, I think. I think that was a big delineation from what I see in a lot of other, or hear about in other dynamics. There was never an expectation from my father that now it's your job to take care of your sister. She just was so selfless in that way to do that for me. But I find it unique. I'm sort of being wordy in the way that, yes, she did step in for me, but I think she stepped in ways that showed me how that we could take care of ourselves too, as opposed to, here, now I'm your mom. Does that make sense?
I think that happens with that was my experience too. Just, I was the youngest. I was 8 when my dad passed away, and, within a couple of years, my mom remarried too. And actually my sister left, and my brother was, like 13, 14. And so he was kind of doing his own thing. And so I kind of raised myself.
Yeah.
And so, I think that for a lot of child grievers, we do learn resiliency in that way, and how to be resourceful and how to take care of ourselves. I think we're kind of just, that's a lifestyle we don't choose, but for me, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change, of course, I would absolutely love to know what it would have been like to grow up with my father, but it shapes us. It shapes who we are and how we are as parents, then as adults too. It's,
For sure.
Do you feel like, I'm just curious, do you feel like do you gravitate towards that, what you learn from that experience? Like for me personally, like I want my kids to be independent. I want them to learn how to take care of themselves too, because we don't know what the future holds. And I've found that for myself. Did you feel that? Have you found that too as a parent?
I'm actually not a parent.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Kids. No, it's okay.
Oh,
No problem.
I'm sorry.
No problem. I know, when I say family, technically that's my husband and my dog.
Yeah. Well,
And I
hey,
always,
that's okay.
it is a family. It is a family, but I do also understand it creates a different context. And I'm always like, how can I communicate that without saying my husband and my dog? But you know, I've been very involved in not helping to raise my nieces and nephews by any means, but I have certainly witnessed that journey with my sister very, very, very much. Right, and I think you're right in terms of wanting them to be able to take care of themselves the way that you were able to be able to let go of, for lack of a better term, to not have the fear that they wouldn't be okay if something would happen, right? And then I think there's also, and I can't speak for you, I can only speak to what I've witnessed, but I think there's also this line of also, oh my gosh, I want to protect you with every part of my being because I know what those things felt like, or I know what those things felt like for me, right? Like, again, we can't always know for everybody. We're very different, but you can relate to the depth of pain that took place in your life. And I imagine, and I hear that it's always really very a fine line in terms of how do I honor these really deep, critical, resilient pieces of myself without willingly giving my child a basket of hell, you know? Just, that's not really, I envy. I don't mean that, you know, derogatorily. I think that when I look at my journey, I understand why anything can happen. My husband and I don't plan to have kids, but we also are open to, if the world decides we're having children, we are a strong couple. We would be great parents. We will make it work, you know. But I'm still working out a lot of the stuff in my life that I don't think it would prevent me from being a good parent, but they're not struggles I want to have while I'm being a parent. You know, the amount of times I've heard in my life that I should have children to go heal the grief of not having a relationship with my mom is
No way.
laughable. It's laughable, really. And very much like, you know, I appreciate that experience is actually very true for a lot of people. Let me put it that way. That is very true for a lot of people, but I don't believe that needs to be the goal. That's not going to be my goal, to have children, right? My child, their only burden in life is to be children, right? Not to be my savior, not to be my hero, not to be my healing tool. And so for me personally, it's just something that I've taken a lot of time to really dissect, and it's just a decision I want to be 110% sure about, and I have never gotten there yet. And I think because of everything I just told you, you know, that I recognize that deep pain, and that doesn't mean that I can't overcome it and do both. It's that I want to do both, or I want to be able to yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Well, I didn't expect the conversation to go this way, and I'm excited. I'm glad, because I think it is a very good point. I made this assumption that you had children just because, to me, like, you come off as a very nurturing, you know what I mean? I get that vibe from you. And so,
Thank you.
you know, slap me on the hand for making an assumption.
No, not at all. Not at all.
But I think it's a wonderful point, though, that it's like, I think we often, like, there's so many people that maybe out there who've maybe had children to fill a gap, to fill a void of something within them. And for me, I didn't exactly plan to have children either. It really happened for me. But they are like a mirror. They really do hold a mirror to everything that we've experienced, and they'll bring up everything that you need to heal in yourself, right? Not that they need to heal you, but show you what you need to heal. And entrepreneurship is like that too, though. It's, like, building your business, your Etsy store. I'm sure that brought up it's like a baby, when you have a business, it's like a baby, and brings up a lot of, you can have self-worth issues that come up. You can have just so many things. Would you agree?
Yes, and well, so there's a few things. I just want to say, don't worry about it at all. I think that that's actually not something that I communicate very clearly to my community, or not clearly. Let me put it this way. I wonder if that's a dialogue I should have. And I've often erred on, I have a lot of lost mothers in my community, and I just don't ever. It's just not the focus of my work per se. Um, See how there's places where I'm minimizing my story for the sake of other people, right? And so ultimately, I just don't want you to worry about it. But I also want to say too that like nothing in what I said was intended to be a criticism of the individuals who maybe that was their goal, right? I just know that that's not right for me personally, and that's another sort of big piece of my testimony in terms of like honor what you know to be true for your grieving process, right? Yeah, there are the most well-intentioned people who are speaking from the depths of their experience and pain. And so I just really wanted to clarify that I didn't mean that as a judgment, um, and certainly don't want to articulate that that's a negative situation. I just know for me and who I know of what I am, that's not the best way to start a family. But piggyback on that about the entrepreneurship piece, it's absolutely true, which is funny because I would never have envisioned myself to be an entrepreneur, but even more so, and you can probably relate to this maybe, but having that deep emotional connection, right, to our legacy or to our grief, like takes it to a whole nother level. And was it last week? I can't even keep track. Within the last couple of weeks, Instagram had shut down my account, and thankfully it got restored and everything's okay. But in the beginning, it was very much like, okay, so it's an Instagram account, big deal, social media. And yet on the other hand, this is like the legacy of my mom. This is the legacy of the journey that I've created. This is tools and resources and community and support for all of these hurting hearts. And it just was devastating. It's not another word to encapsulate, how I felt that day. It was really just like, it just pierces you in a place you didn't think that it would, because again, business is business, and certainly it's important and it's part of our livelihoods and all of those things. But I think we're also in a time of life where, that hustle culture and trying to really compartmentalize the roles that it should have in our life. And so it was interesting to sort of have that just kind of drop in my lap and sort of figure out like, okay.
What do I need to learn here?
What do I need to learn? What does this mean for me? What does this mean about my grief? What does this mean about, all of those things? And nothing really changed. It just was really this, it's almost like it becomes this sort of tangible, at least for me in this particular instance, this tangible source of grief support, for lack of a better term or something. And anyway, yes, it's very, very, very deep and layered, and you invest so many parts of yourself as an entrepreneur in and of itself. But I think we have a unique added emotional quality there.
For sure. Absolutely. So growing up, I'm curious too, if, you had mentioned that your sister kind of stepped in and your dad was in the picture, but he had a business and, with having a business, it takes a lot of your time. Did you receive any counseling or anything as you got older, or what have you tried in the past, or what has worked for you? I think that's like 3 or 4 questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It's all the same. So growing up, the short answer is not really. My understanding is right after my mom's homicide, my family had done some trauma therapy sessions. I mean, a handful, I gather. Again, I was an infant, so I can't really articulate the impact that had. And I don't even, although I'd like to, right? I'm sure that, it still impacted me in the ways of how my family moved forward in some things, but I don't have a lot of information about that. And then it was interesting when I was in the elementary school, and I still don't have a lot of information about this either, but I wound up on somebody's radar, and I would get pulled out of classes to go do play therapy. I had good grades. I was well behaved, so it wasn't like at least from my understanding, that I was struggling. It was honestly, it feels like a blessing. They're vague memories, but they're positive memories of being just in this tiny room with this play therapist, and there were sometimes a couple of other kids, and I don't know, it just sort of laid the groundwork a little bit in terms of all of this. I think my understanding that there were layers to things, or ways to be emotional without I think it gave me a different understanding of how you could learn about yourself emotionally speaking, right? I think, back in the 80s and 90s, it was always just very scary, and this idea that it would be all consuming, and you just kind of don't go there. And so it I don't know, it was a good model for me. And so then fast forward, when I was in college, I decided to start going to the counseling center on campus. Like I had said, my sister was such a good model for me in that way, and that was something she had done when she was in college, and it was a positive experience for her. And so I just followed in her footsteps, and that was actually a pivotal experience, but it was really negative, unfortunately. What I know now, of course, after being part of the mental health care system and after earning my degree and whatnot, it was short-term counseling model, and I understand the limitations of that now. But ultimately, I was 20 years old. If I had I was 20 years old. I walk in there, I sort of explained the very loose situation of, my family history, and the reason that I felt like it was time was I just sort of felt like grief was seeping out of me, right? Like none of my emotional responses, I couldn't regulate myself. Nothing matched up with what was really happening. And so that was sort of the catalyst. And so as I explained all of this to her, she was not nice, not even warm or comforting. She was just very matter of fact. Basically said, you're dealing with a lot of trauma. We can't help you with the amount of time that we have here. So here's a list, and good luck. And I was very much like, if I had the resources to start in all these other places, maybe I would have, right? And I understand now again, but she didn't even finish the session with me. It's like, okay, well, let's create some support in the 60 minutes that we have. Well, can we call some of these people together, or what do we do with if these resources don't work out for you, or even are you suicidal? You know what I mean? Like, we didn't go over any of that. And so that was heartbreaking for me. I walked out feeling really kind of broken, right? I'd spent my whole life like running and achieving and kind of proving that I was this accomplished, capable, resilient person. And then somebody basically said, nope, not really. And so that put me off for a couple years, and just by the grace of God, everything was okay. There's so many people that that's not necessarily the case. And I got another referral through a coworker, and I think I just had explained everything that I just told you, and it just felt like a trusted situation to finally try again. And that actually was a really positive experience. So I went to that therapist for probably 3 years. And we did a lot of relational and imago work. Really this idea that, right, that our romantic partners, we choose them to help them heal these unhealed parts of our childhood self. And that was actually really beneficial, but I don't know that that was the right place to start, is my point in saying all of that. Because if you're dealing with trauma, you don't even feel safe in your relationships. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, but I didn't know that. The reason I'm articulating all of this is how much I sort of thought I knew in terms of what the resources are, or the avenues to take, or you just go see a therapist, right? Certainly things have changed a lot in the last 10 or 15 years, tremendously speaking, in regards to trauma and whatnot. But she was a safe place, but I still don't know that that's where my healing began, if you will. And then fast forward a few more years, and I started working with a trauma-informed therapist about 6 years ago. And I still have lots of challenges that I work on every day, but it's been pretty incredible to sort of just understand everything that I was dealing with now from a different perspective, right? I think that I always knew that it was tragic the way that my mom died and when she died, but I don't think that I realized how traumatized I was. I don't think I realized these really clear cut ways in which the aftermath really created even more challenges than already growing up without, my primary caretaker. And but more than anything, because again, you can go on and on about all the tips and tricks and this and that, and it won't always apply to everybody. But the biggest thing for me that really applied in kind of walking through this journey was really looking at everything that I've learned or that I was told or that I intuited from the world growing up about grief and loss. And I really just decided to say, none of this, that doesn't apply to me. Kept trying to force myself into these boxes, into these stages, into these understandings of what things should be like or look like or feel like. And it just was a bunch of junk, right? And so that was the biggest tool that it gave me, was to help me to trust myself, to trust my own feelings and my own opinions about things, and to know that I could honor my grief on my own, whether or not people agree with it or depending, no matter what they think about it or whatnot. And so that's been the biggest, I think, role that it has supported for me, is constantly providing that mirror of everything I just said, that we can choose our own way. And doing that has been, I don't want to say it's been the most healing, I have an interesting perspective about healing, and I know that my situation is particularly complex, but it gave me the freedom to sort of understand how I could get there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we're all wired differently too, and we're going to take in information differently and process it differently. And at some points and some stages and phases we'll be ready for it, and at other times we won't. And it's, I think we also too we question ourselves a lot when we feel like we're kind of crazy. I felt crazy. And you really can't. How do you tap into your intuition? How do you tap into your heart when you're stuck in your head? And, in grief recovery, we say too, you can't heal the heart with the head. And the only way is to get connected within and to know, really, to be led to what you need and follow through on that. And like you said, create your own path. And it's going to look like a roller coaster. It might look like, it's not going to look the same for everybody.
No.
We don't come to that place the same way.
No. And I like what you said about that body connection, right? For me, that's been a huge piece. But I don't know that I believe that we can heal without the body, right? Like, if you think about your emotions and your feelings, you experience them physically, right? This mind-body connection is so interwoven and so intertwined. And yet, for me personally, excuse me, because my mom died during such a crucial developmental stage for me, like, literally, you cannot survive without other humans. You know what I mean? And in a lot of ways, I think that I intuited the level of support that was available. And I don't think that there was very much, and so I didn't act out. I just shut down. I've asked, did I have sleep problems? Did I cry? Did I stop eating? Did I anything? Right? And everybody's memory is very vague because, again, time and just grief and trauma and all those things. But I think that I really cut myself off from that piece of knowing, that intuitive sort of way to connect with that deep that deep anguish, right? And it sounds horrific. Like, who wants to go connect with that? Who wants to take the time to create the space to feel that in your body, right? But otherwise it just lives there, and so that's been a big piece of being trauma formed. When I say trauma informed therapist, certainly it's not only that she has an understanding of what trauma is and how it plays out in our lives and all of those things, but also really how the way to heal trauma is through the body. You can't do it without it, right? And so she's really created that safe space for me to be able to feel those horrible sensations that I had to feel alone as a baby, to really give space to that pre-verbal experience, right? And this is sort of an interesting thing to say because not everybody deals with their grief by talking about it. I think I deal with life by talking about everything sort of as a result. Ultimately, I wasn't even talking at the time. I literally did not have the capacity to communicate what was going on, right? And so it just, I appreciate you really making that point about the body, because it's so easy to think that it's such a mental process, right? It's just an emotional process that's in our head. We're crazy, we're weak, we're stuck, we're insert whatever the world has told us. It's a crucial piece that I don't think very many of us realize. And in a way that, as much as sort of even as I'm talking to you, I'm like, and I don't even know if I am either. Right? I talk about trauma and I talk about the body-based work that I do, but I don't know that I've ever articulated or recognized just how interwoven the grieving process is with the body, and how often we're trying to shortchange that.
I think too, if you've had a traumatic experience with your body, like I have, I disassociated myself from my body as well.
Yeah.
And I didn't care about my body. I didn't take care of my body. And I didn't have a level of, you have self-worth issues, but then it's like, it's yourself, your body. My body isn't, so I think you know where I'm getting at, but it's just that, depending on the grief and the trauma, or the trauma itself, I didn't realize the mind-body connection until I actually went through grief recovery. And I say this on every episode because I'm so passionate about it, but I did not make that connection to the mind and body until I did the heart work, until I really allowed myself to go there.
Yeah.
And it was life-changing for me. And so, I firmly believe you cannot heal the heart with the head. It's, we're just stuck up there sometimes. And,
I heard another quote the other day that reminds me of that a little bit. Something about, can't feel when you're talking or something like that. And I was like, that makes a lot, right? Sort of referencing what I said, like I talk a million miles a minute and I will, feels right in line with that, And two, I think you made a really good point in the sense of like, there's this idea that like, you won't be able to come back from it, right? Whereas the idea is that you're creating this trusting relationship where your body shows, but I can hold this, but we are strong enough to do this, right? But you're over there in the corner saying, but I can do it with only 3 legs when the 4th leg is over here, right? I realize humans only have 2 legs, but I appreciate you making that point. And I know that we're still unraveling in terms of what we know and research and all of that, but I think that that's a crucial piece in terms of sort of the next piece of bridging those gaps too, because I think too, not to take over this, it's a whole different conversation really, but I read a book recently called Before and After Loss by Lisa Schulman, and it was basically like what happens to your brain in grief, right? And I really appreciated the context in there in terms of like, she was talking about the overlap of grief and trauma, right? Not all grief is traumatic and not all trauma is grief, but ultimately, like when you really put them side by side, the number of people that are in both pools, right? And we're constantly separating them. And so I just think that that's a big piece in terms of moving forward that can articulate a lot of things that maybe we weren't looking at. Sort of what you were saying, you didn't understand the mind-body connection, or you didn't quite understand that traumatic piece, right? And so that I just think that we have a lot of ability to change the landscape of it a little bit by joining them together.
Yes, yeah, I would agree.
Pointing out how common, there we go. That's what I was trying to say.
So what is one thing that you would like to get across today about your grief? What would you like people to know about your grief?
One big piece I already said, certainly that it's lifelong, right? This idea that that I could be a 37-year-old woman still grieving for somebody that I don't know. I think it speaks volumes, right? And again, I think that on one level, people look at it and say, well, of course, you lost your mom. It was so tragic. It was so traumatic. And yet I think that there's enough examples out there in the world where people don't really take that to heart. Not for me personally, but for individuals like us. Sort of see that playing out right now, just turning on the news, So really just trying to articulate, right? There really is no timeline. There is no time frame. There are no 5 stages. None of that.
Thank you. Amen.
For me, yeah, for me personally, that if you happen to be someone and your experience has been that way, praise the Lord. I'm so glad for you, because it's just a really confusing extra added layer of anger and just frustration, because you feel so alone and so misunderstood, and all the things that are out there, or most of them up until this point, really just were very unrealistic, But the other piece of that, and maybe this is an undertone of that, but as much as I work with adults, I don't work with children. I don't feel that that's necessarily my strength, and yet my experience, I feel like it's crucial for me to articulate that what children don't know or don't remember still hurt them. It can still impact them. Let me use that word instead, right? But this idea that that I was so strong and that I got such good grades, and just insert all the junk that people think is a replacement for a parent. And I bought into that. That was an identity that really carried me through. And on one hand, I'm grateful. I needed something to carry me through. And yet then I grew up and I was like, well, shit, nobody has even any clue that I'm struggling so much. And I don't even understand why I'm struggling so much, because I've never talked about it. Right? Yes, of course it was tragic, but I don't know anything different. Right? And so it was this constant rationalization of my experience against the world. And so it's important to me to say, just, don't assume that your child is going to be traumatized because they go through hard things. Absolutely not. Children are so strong and so resilient, but we need to provide the tools and the environment and the resources for them to be able to communicate, or to feel safe, to be honest if we ask what they're struggling with, and to not minimize that, and to not give them some childlike answer and ignore it until it comes up again. That's a big piece for me in terms of really just understanding that grief impacts children too. And it's not the same as adults. And I can't even necessarily articulate how it will impact your child. But I just want people to be aware of the fact that providing that support is one of the most crucial parts of helping them heal.
And what I've learned too, even through grief recovery, we have the program Helping Children with Loss program, which is bar none. Going through the program has made me a better parent, because if I can't tell the emotional truth about myself, how can I expect my child to come to me
exactly
and tell the emotional truth about themselves? And so it really is just to have this dialogue and conversation. You know, it's like I've seen arguments of people online where someone takes their child to a funeral and people are just outraged. Like, why would you do that? Why would you let them see the body? And like, well, because just because you're uncomfortable with having that conversation, you know, and I saw my dad in his casket, no one talked to me about it. There was no conversation, you know, and so I just like to piggyback on what you'd said, just because children bounce back. I hear that all the time. Oh, they'll bounce back.
Mm-hmm.
Those children grow up to be adults. And so if that is never addressed, it will rear its ugly head. Rest assured.
Absolutely.
In some way, some form,
Absolutely.
somehow.
You know, and certainly, and I've seen that in my work, you know, in the ways that, you know, my family we all grieve very differently. I would say I'm definitely one who grieves the most out loud. But they are tolerant of it and they're accepting of it, and they don't tell me to do anything different with it. And so I really appreciate and respect that, because they didn't sign up to have, you know, their deepest pain to be so public. And but it's been really incredible to see sort of the how do we put this? The ways that it's impacted my family that I didn't even necessarily expect. Some of the conversations that I've had with my dad, that I can just recognize that I'm helping them process this too, right? That doesn't mean I'm so far along. Hey, I'm right here with you, right? But it's been really interesting and helpful to be able to see that piece come back, instead of feeling like, oh, am I crossing the boundaries? I don't want to violate anybody, you know, and I honor that. But I also need to honor my own experience, and I'm tired of living the secret, you know? And so it's really trying to honor both of those. But to see the ways that my being public about it or outspoken about it has helped them see things in a different way. Or even if it hasn't, it's helped me understand them on a deeper level. So it's been an unexpected blessing, I guess.
And that brings up a good point too, in that I think oftentimes we tend to sweep the hard stuff under the rug. And especially where I live, the German heritage, you know, people come and the people that came and settled here, it was dead of winter, it's harsh, that's a special breed of people. You know, they're pretty real. Yeah, like
for real.
You're pretty hard and, you know, determined, and, you know, and so it is this German tough exterior culture, and we don't talk about it. We don't need that. We're fine. You know, and it's really difficult for people who grow up like that to ask for help, to seek out support, to look for community of like-minded or people that are maybe a little further than they are, you know, for guidance or support. And so, yeah, I just wanted to highlight that point that you had brought up, that support's huge.
Yeah. And, you know, that it can go both ways, I think, is sort of an interesting concept, right? Because, and I can't speak for you, but like as the children, right, as the children who are looking to everybody else, just a word.
Well, we resort to what we know, and we look to the adults to emulate. Well, okay, well, that's how we deal with grief, or that's how we don't it. Okay, I guess I'm not going to talk about it either.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I guess I'm fine, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's several myths of grief that we talk about in grief recovery, and one of them is, you know, grieve alone, and that's what I did, you know, stuff. And then there are some kids too, like we were talking about the differences. Some kids will lash out, some kids will exhibit different behaviors, depending on how they've been, what's been emulated for them, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So let's see, what, I'm getting a low system resources may affect my audio quality. I'm gonna
Oh
have to edit this
no.
part out, but yeah. Why is that? Oh, you know what? I have Photoshop open. And that's like a CPU sucker. Anyway,
Do you
try
want
and finish.
to? No, it's fine. Do
No,
you want
I
to
can hear
stop and
you
restart?
fine.
Okay.
No, no.
I
I,
just was
th-
wondering if you
I,
wanted to stop and shut it out so it doesn't down on us in the middle of it.
you know what? I'm closing it out.
Technology.
Yeah, I should have done that beforehand. Okay. All
Well,
right.
if there's any glitches, I'm happy to redo it. I've had to do that before and it was fine. So don't worry about it.
I hope it's okay. I'll let you
Yeah,
know,
no
but
worries. Yeah, no
I'm
worries.
thinking Photoshop is the culprit there. Um, is there anything else you'd like to share?
That's a good question.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I'm just trying to think. I was like, I feel like the things that I normally would say right now, I've already actually touched on. So I don't want to waste anybody's time, waste your listeners' time. I
Well,
just want to,
I can edit some stuff out.
um, more than anything, I just want to let people know that for me in my community, what I believe is that you have the right to grieve in your own way, right? There is no right or wrong way to grieve. There's no timeline to it. Um, what happened wasn't your fault. You know, the biggest process or the biggest change for me in my process was giving myself that permission to change what I think, right? And so I really just encourage your audience to really think about when it comes to their primary struggles, right? If there's these little tenets that are the piece that they struggle most with, if you will, sort of what I was just saying, right? I should be over this right by now. I should get over this, or all of those things. I just encourage you to sort of ask yourself where those ideas came from. Do you feel like they're serving you in your own process? Right? I feel like two things sort of are happening. We're all really unprepared. We get thrown into this situation, this universal human situation, and we don't know what to do because nobody's talking about it. Right? And so we're already sort of at a deficit, for lack of a better term. I don't like that term, but we're unprepared. Not that you can prepare for it, but we're unprepared in the way that everything we've been told is generally not true, or there are very strong chances that it won't look that way for you, right? And so I really want people to have the flexibility to be able to say, where did I learn this? Who benefits from me hearing this? Does this feel right in my gut? Does this serve me? And if it does, then, you know, do your thing. But if it doesn't, then I just really, you have the right to grieve your own way, to honor your own process, to do it differently. And that doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. That doesn't mean you're dishonoring anybody. That doesn't mean that you're betraying anybody. It just really is a matter of making sure that you're not grieving the way that you were prescribed to grieve.
I like that. Prescribed. Yeah, because I think society puts on this prescription, right? Yeah. Because collectively, we all have these beliefs. And there's some universal beliefs. You know, time heals all wounds. We all know that line, you know. So like you said, it's, yeah, challenge what your own beliefs about what you feel about grief and what you've been taught about grief. For sure.
And just make sure that they're yours, right? Just make sure they're yours. Or not even yours, but the ones that have been passed on to you feel like that they're serving you. Right. And there's an answer there's something my therapist asks me all the time to sort of, because I often feel like, well, how do I don't really know. You know, there's so much of like, you know, I think a lot of what we talked about, there's this sort of disconnect in and of itself, but it also can be overwhelming. Like you don't know until you go through it, right? And yet, one really important thread that's like right on the outskirts of my brain. I'm trying to pull it back.
I've been there.
But more about really just recognizing that what works for you doesn't have to look what works for other people. It just doesn't. And but you're also not necessarily going to know that right off the bat too, right? And so there's some trial and error there in terms of figuring out what your journey is and how you can infuse pieces that did speak to you. And now I remember the piece I was trying to say. My therapist, she will often say, you know, when we're trying to figure out if something feels good or expansive or healthy or productive or fulfilling, insert whatever word you want to use for you. It's more of like, does that feel expansive in your heart? You know, and that doesn't necessarily mean that sadness is going to fill you up with joy. But again, it's sort of tapping into those sensations in your body, right? The things that are right for you, you're going to feel expansive. You're going to feel open. You're going to feel like, oh, I kind of feel like I can breathe right there. I don't feel relieved per se, but I feel a shift, right? Whereas the things that are not right for you, you're instantly going to clench up. You're going to shut down. You're going to feel rigid. You're going to feel resistant, right? And so those can sort of be those intuitive nudges in terms of, I don't really know what I feel or what feels good or what's helpful or not. Those are kind of the sensations that you can follow to get more clarity there. Yeah.
There's 2 points. I just think 2 things that came to my mind. Well, one, I think 2, it's having an open mind. Like just being open to whatever may come your way, that if it piques your interest, there's a reason.
Yeah.
You know, and follow that curiosity of what may be helpful, you know, because it could be the thing that unlocks everything that changes your life. That's what happened for me. But the other thing too is, coming from an energy standpoint as a Reiki master, and I was not even remotely, like, I'd never even experienced Reiki before I became certified in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was led to it. I was curious about it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I like did the inner work. But there's one thing that people could do. You stand up straight and tall, and you put your hands on your chest.
Can I
and
do
you
this?
close your eyes. And you can sit, you can do the sitting too, I suppose, but you close your eyes and you ask yourself the question, you know, whatever it is that you're trying to discern, you know, like, should I go to this workshop? Is this workshop good for me? Or, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And if you feel yourself kind of leaning forward, that's like a good thing. But if you find yourself going back, like leaning back, like your body just is being pulled backwards, that's like a contracting. That's like just a
fascinating. That's like a pendulum kind of, right?
It is. Like, because our bodies always speak to us. Always. And that's the thing too. Like, I've really tapped into the body energy aspect of my own healing, and have learned so much about that mind-body connection, because we are energy. We are made up of energy. Our feelings, emotions, our thoughts have energy behind them. And our body knows.
Mhm.
Our body knows. So just do that. You know, try that
And our
when
body
you're
is energy too, right? It's not
on
only
a
energy, but it's
cellular
also the
level.
container. Oh wow, that's
A
crazy.
cellular level, like our
Yeah.
we are made up of cells, and
Mhm.
cells are energy.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I'm learning so much.
Love it.
I'm
I
glad to
can see
share that.
you. Yeah, definitely. I love seeing your face light up with the Reiki. I've had it done. And I actually had an invitation to go be certified in it recently, and I decided not to, only because I still am feeling like for me. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like, I've noticed I'm always, and this isn't a bad thing by any means, but I always go like serve others in ways of like serving myself. And I was like, but that's actually an area where I just want to be served. Does that make sense?
Oh, Reiki serves. It
And does
does.
it?
Oh my gosh. It is a gift that will keep on giving to yourself.
That's
Trust me
cool
when
to
I say
hear
that.
because I feel this isn't even necessarily anything I talked about per se, but the attachment trauma. I have attachment trauma, obviously, from losing my mom at such a pivotal time and not having really safe and consistent caretaking after that. And so I get really nervous that like I don't have when I have how do I say this? I'm scared that I won't be able to hold my boundaries. And that was a big piece
Mm.
of when I was doing counseling work. I felt like I like had the whole world was on my shoulders. And so that was sort of where I was able to say, well, I'm much more of an advocate as opposed to like a therapist. And that boundary really serves me in terms of what's my responsibility and kind of all that. But there's certainly a fear with the Reiki that I'm nervous that like I'll just drown in it or something almost. Am I making any sense?
You know what though? Yeah, and you know what? If you just do Reiki level 1 and 2, you can give Reiki to yourself. Just think of it, it's for yourself. And that's why I did it. That is why I did it.
I
Was for myself.
didn't know you could do that to
But
yourself.
I went on to the next level. What's that?
I didn't know that you could do Reiki on yourself. How does that work?
Oh gosh. We will have to have another
We
conversation.
will. Right? I'm just referring like
Yeah.
to the few experiences I've had. So
No, it's not just for
neat.
really, I went to get certified for me. But it's really just, it's really,
No.
I've gotten so much back from it and helping other people too with giving
Yeah.
giving Reiki and things like that. But it's opened up, like I went for Reiki Master and like in a few weeks I'm doing my Karuna. It's like the next level up. And that's the next level after that is licensed. And there's only like 30 licensed Asui Reiki
Oh
masters in the
my gosh,
world.
congratulations. That's really
Yeah, but
exciting.
it is exciting. So I'm excited for that. But yeah, it's we'll just have to have another conversation about that. But
We will. We
I
will.
do, if the universe keeps hitting you on the head and showing up for you with Reiki, Reiki, Reiki. And that's what was happening for me. Like I kept hearing about it, kept seeing it. And I had never experienced it, like I said. And I just thought, what is this Reiki business? And so I
Yeah, it's
followed
pretty
that curiosity.
magical. I mean, the experience that I have had was very magical. But like I said, I felt very like, you were the guide. I was just the receptacle or something. And cool. I'm glad we got onto this a little bit.
Yeah. Well, like energy, grief, it's all connected. It's all connected. So where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Absolutely. So my shop is thejoyfuljewelrybox.com, and you can connect with me there. Normally I start with my social media, but since that got a little weird lately, you can always find me in my shop. On Instagram, I am at the Joyful Jewelry Box. And or if you just want to email me if there's any questions you had or this conversation spoke to you, you can always email me at thejoyfuljewelrybox@gmail.com. So
Perhaps that experience was a little push to consider the online space isn't a website.
Actually, no, so you're so sweet to say that. Yes, it is. There's actually, you know, a handful of irons in the fire, and that experience definitely helped me sort of organize some of my priorities. Yes. So, but I did actually also, not that this is necessarily relevant, but I did start another account just in case. It's called Joyful Jewelry Box. So even if anything weird happens, you'll be able to find me. I'll make sure.
Okay. Well, you know, I'm always looking to help people get a little bit out of their comfort zone. So if you ever do launch a website, let me know.
I will. So wait a minute. Do you have experience in that, or you mean just because you're interested?
Well, because you have the Etsy shop, right? But do you have joyfuljewelrybox.com?
Yes. Yeah. And so
Oh, you do?
yes. Yeah. And so my Etsy, I just have it reroute to my Etsy right now.
Oh, okay.
Yes. But that was why I was saying, I was like, wait a minute, do you build websites too? And I don't know. That's all.
Well, I have a lot of experience in that regard.
Yeah, I bet. I know. I was on your website this morning.
I've been in the
I really like how it's all laid out.
I've been in the entrepreneurial space since 2009, and I actually designed my first website, my very first website by myself, and I would never, that was with code and everything, never. Oh my gosh, that was a nightmare. Things are so much easier now. So much easier. Yeah. So yeah, but if you ever need guidance with that, you know where to find me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for being here. This was such a different conversation in a good way. I'm glad it went where it went. I think the message that you needed to get across, I felt it, and I hope my audience does as well. And yeah, so good.
Thank you, Victoria. I appreciate you reaching out, and just to anybody in your audience, you're welcome to come to my community, and not as a replacement by any means. That's not what I meant. But I just love meeting anybody who finds me through other grief communities. It's just really cool to see how we can all support each other and really, you know, create the connections from our stories, you know, like I said, from being able to really just start from a place of knowing who people are, or at least some of the most important parts of who we are. And so I really love when people come over and share their story with me or share why my story spoke to them or whatnot. So love to meet anybody new.
Well, and I think too, it's part of the mission of mine. The reason for starting this podcast was to talk about grief like we talk about the weather.
Exactly.
And so whether it's my account, your account, another grieving account, grief account, it doesn't matter. We're talking about it. And
totally.
That's the goal, is to normalize it, right?
Absolutely. So thank you for what you're doing to normalize it. And I was poking around on your website today, and it's cool to see everything that you're doing, right? I love that you're providing one-on-one support. I love that you're providing online support. I just, it was neat to see all the different offerings that you have. And I think that people, excuse me, it gets scared, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Freaking scary. But I think that they get scared that you know, there are only so many options, and it's just not going to work for them. And ultimately, the point is just, like you said, keep your mind open. This is such a unique and nuanced process. Like, nothing can ever really be captured in one of these conversations or in one Instagram post, etc. And so I just encourage you to seek out those safe communities to be able to have these conversations. I think you and I both sort of articulated that when things are ready, it reveals itself to us when whether we are ready or not, you know. So.
And the universe will hit you on the head till you
exactly
open the door.
Yeah. So.
All right.
Thank you for all that you're doing and giving back to this community. I really appreciate it.
Likewise.
Yeah.
And stay tuned. Come back next week for another interview. And thank you, Lindsay, for being on. And have a great rest of your day, everyone. Much love.